Now, yesterday we had a look at what was happening in Europe's energy crisis, and if you want to see where we're headed, you can do no better than look at what's happening in Europe at the moment. Most European nations have retired too much baseload generation, mainly coal, and pushed too hard on boosting renewable energy. It can't do the job and simply never will. Here's the latest from Global News on what's unfolding in Britain.
5 out of every 6 homes in Britain use natural gas for heating, and 40% of the electricity is generated using gas. Although almost none of that comes from Russia, the spiking global market for gas is still driving up UK utility bills from $2,000 a year for the average home to as high as nearly $8,000 by next spring. Some European governments, like France and Italy, are capping such increases. The UK is instead offering rebates, but analysts say those measures are nowhere near enough to help the poorest.
If those bill increases go through for this coming winter, more than half of the entire country will be classed as being in energy fuel poverty. That's how extreme the rises are.
In the UK, fuel poverty is where more than 10% of household income goes to energy.
And as usual, of course, it's those on the lowest incomes who are going to suffer the most from this stuff. Now, to discuss this and more, I'm joined by Copenhagen Consensus President Bjorn Lomborg. His latest book is False Alarm: How Climate Change Panic Costs Us Trillions, Hurts the Poor and Fails to Fix the Planet. Thanks again for your time, Bjorn. This must be just astonishing to see the way the energy crisis is unfolding at the moment in Europe. Of course, the Ukrainian war and the constrictions on Russian gas supplies is playing a role, but there's so many other factors involved, especially the way European countries have deliberately undermined the reliability of their own energy supplies.
Yes, Chris. So absolutely, the Ukrainian war is playing a big role right now. It's put this at a head. But fundamentally, the problem is that we've tried to go a lot renewable without actually having, as you pointed out, the baseload power to back it up. And we use gas for that. And since we've decided we didn't want to go fracking ourselves, which of course has given the US lots and lots of gas very cheaply, we are now in a position where we have to pay very, very high prices for gas. This is going to be much, much worse coming into next winter. It's likely right now the German one-year ahead prices are now an exorbitant almost 60 US cents per kilowatt hour. It's never been this high, and it's going to fundamentally stress Europe, possibly even destroy Europe. This is very, very serious, and I don't think we have any sense of how hard it's going to be. And this is mostly because we decided to go a lot renewable.
Exactly. Too much reliance on renewables, not enough reliable energy. The poor will suffer the worst, and it's not an exaggeration. In fact, it would be a reality, would it not, that going through this winter, this is going to cost people their lives.
Oh, absolutely. Look, we hear a lot about heat wave deaths, and that's a real problem. But what we don't hear is that many more people all across the world die from cold. About 9 times more people die from cold than from heat. And of course, people die from cold because they can't keep their homes heated. Now, if the price goes through the roof, it's very likely that people won't be able to heat their homes as well, and that will mean many more people dying from cold. I'm sort of curious to the fact, for instance, we heard a lot about Britain and last month when they had huge heat wave spikes, and possibly more than 1,000 people died from heat. But we don't hear the fact that every year in Britain, 60,000 plus people die from cold. Surely we need to hear both, and we probably should hear about 60 times more about the cold deaths. We don't. And that's one of the reasons why we have such problems getting our policies right.
Look, it's just heartbreaking to think of those people on fixed incomes scrimping on their heating over winter because they can't afford the power bills. But talk about the economic opportunity cost of all this, because what's happened in countries like Britain and Spain and Germany and Australia, we've spent an enormous amount of government money subsidising renewables, and that's made our electricity more expensive, which has cost us jobs and other opportunities. And now the cost to consumers is getting so high, they're talking about governments paying rebates back to consumers to pay more money to try and reduce the cost of their electricity. It's just money chasing money with no productive outcome.
Yeah, partly it will be unsustainable because most governments in Europe won't be able to afford to pay this much. But of course, the whole point of the price signal is to reduce consumption. If you then subsidize the price, you're essentially getting more of that problem. But fundamentally, what this tells us is we need to be realistic about the policies that we pursue. First of all, Europe, despite the fact that it tries to be a leader on climate impact, remember, it still just gets 3.4% of its energy from solar, wind, and all other renewables apart from biofuels. So fundamentally, Europe has not succeeded except in making itself very, very vulnerable. One way that it could have dealt with this is by focusing much more on fracking. Remember, in the US, they basically delivered on fracking, which both gave huge environmental benefits and huge economic benefits. Fracking basically releases lots more gas availability at very low cost. Gas emits about half as much CO2 as does coal. And so switching from coal to gas not only delivers a huge reduction in CO2, the US has had the largest reduction of any nation in the world over the last 10 years because of fracking, but it also delivers much greater productivity because you get cheap electricity. Remember, the US is also seeing increase in gas prices, but much, much less than what Europe is doing, basically because it has fracking. And it would save people. So there was a study that showed of the people who are heated with gas, which is not all that many, it's about a third in the US. It showed that because fracking made gas cheaper, it meant people heated their homes better. That saves on average every year 11,000 people from dying. Or to put it differently, if you don't frack, you have 11,000 more people dying every year.
Yeah, fracking also, well, gas generation also works in with renewables very well because it can ramp up and ramp down very quickly. Just very quickly, Bjorn, I have to get your thoughts on this similar vein. Nuclear. There was a big push to start drawing down on nuclear energy post Fukushima, but France is now looking at expanding it, and surely the rest of Europe will be doing the same.
Yes. So fortunately, Germany stupidly decided to phase out nuclear power, although it's not dangerous. You've already incurred most of the cost. It generates a lot of CO2-free electricity. They've now said at least they're going to save the last 3. Nuclear is not the savior in the current form because third generation of the current generation is still very expensive, but fourth generation nuclear holds lots of promise, and we should definitely be investing a lot more in making sure that that becomes the reality, not just for Europe, but for Australia and for China, India, and Africa. So for
Africa,
everyone
South
else.
America, the works, yeah. Thanks so much for joining us, Bjorn. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bjorn Lomborg just talks so much sense on these issues. It's about getting your priorities right and spending your resources well.